My name is Karen Myers. I am 32 years old. 2 weeks ago, my mother stood in a courtroom and dismissed me as nothing more than a waitress. She held up a photo of me in my cafe apron as if it were evidence of a crime. The judge studied the image. The gallery laughed. My mother's attorney smiled like victory was already his. What none of them knew, and what my mother never bothered to discover, is that I had been waiting for this moment for 3 months. Not out of revenge, but because I knew exactly what she would do, and I had prepared for every word. This is the story of how my mother tried to seize my grandfather's $11 million estate, and what happened when I finally stood up. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This is the place where we share tales of family betrayal, firm boundaries, and finding your voice when the people who should love you most try to tear you down. If you're new here, drop a comment and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. My grandfather, Walter Myers, was a Vietnam veteran. He came home in 1971 with a Purple Heart and $37 in his pocket. By the time he was 50, he owned 6 rental properties and a small commercial building on Route 9. By 70, his portfolio had grown to $11 million. He never spoke about money. He spoke about discipline. I grew up 2 blocks from his house in a small Virginia town. After my mother left when I was 12, suitcase in hand, driving off with her boyfriend, my grandfather became my world. He picked me up from school, taught me how to change a tire, how to read a bank statement, and how to shake someone's hand with conviction. He kept his important papers in a cedar box on the top shelf of his study. The wood carried the scent of the workshop where he taught me to build birdhouses when I was 9. Every time I opened that box, I was 9 years old again, standing on a step stool as he handed me a hammer. My grandfather had a saying. He used it whenever I grew frustrated with homework, with bullies, or with the empty chair at the dinner table where my mother once sat. The quietest person in the room is usually the one who knows the most. I didn't understand it then. I do now. When he fell ill 2 years before his death, I requested a permanent change of station from my unit and moved back home. I took a job at Frank's Cafe 2 blocks from his house, so I could walk over on my lunch break and sit with him. That is the job my mother weaponized against me in court. My mother, Diane, always wanted a different life. She disliked our quiet town and the careful, modest way my grandfather lived. She craved something faster. She left when I was 12. Her boyfriend drove a black SUV and lived in Richmond. She told my father she needed space. She told me she would call every week. She called twice that first month, once the next. By the time I turned 13, her number had changed and she hadn't given me the new one. My grandfather never spoke a harsh word about her. He kept her photo on the shelf beside the cedar box. Every Thanksgiving, he mailed her an invitation. She came once in 2010, stayed 45 minutes, checked her phone the entire time, and left before dessert. She sent a card for my 18th birthday, no return address, just a $25 gift card and a note that read, "Buy yourself something nice." I did not hate her. I want to be clear about that. Hate takes energy, and I had already decided where to spend mine. I went to college on an ROTC scholarship, then to law school. I was commissioned as a JAG officer, a military lawyer, at 26. For 6 years, I prosecuted fraud cases for the United States Army. My mother knew none of this. She never asked. She married twice more after leaving my father. The second marriage lasted 3 years. The third, to a man named Richard Hale, was still intact when my grandfather died. Richard was the first person in her life who realized my grandfather had real money, and Richard was the one who urged her to come back for it. My grandfather died on a Tuesday in January. I was sitting beside his bed, his hand in mine. The room smelled of antiseptic and cedar. I had brought the wooden box from his study and placed it on the nightstand so he could see it. He looked at the box, then at me. "You're going to be fine," he said. "You have always been the strong one." Those were his last words. The funeral was small. Frank closed the cafe for the day. The postman came, the librarian, the pharmacist who had delivered my grandfather's medication every Thursday for 2 years. My father drove down from Pennsylvania. 41 people signed the guest book. My mother was not one of them. 3 weeks later, the attorney read the will. My grandfather named me executor and primary beneficiary of the estate, $11 million in real estate, investments, and liquid accounts. He left my mother $200,000 as a lump sum. The letter attached to the will contained one sentence about Diane: "I love my daughter, but love does not mean trust." That night, I opened the cedar box in his study. Beneath a copy of the will lay a handwritten letter. His penmanship was shaky but clear. The paper smelled of cedar and old ink. "Karen," it read, "if your mother comes back, and she will, it will not be for me. It will be for the money. I chose you because you stayed. Not because I love her less, but because you are the one who will protect what I built." I held the letter to my chest and cried for the first time since the funeral. 6 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID read, "Mom. Sweetheart, we need to talk about Daddy's wishes. I think there has been a terrible mistake." She came to town the following week, not alone. Richard came with her. They asked to meet me at Frank's cafe. I agreed. I wanted her on my turf, not hers. Diane walked in wearing a cashmere coat and leather boots that cost more than Frank's monthly rent. She hugged me at the door as though we had seen each other last week instead of 6 years ago. She smelled of unfamiliar perfume. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, "you look thin. Are you eating enough?" Richard shook my hand with a strong, practiced grip. "Good to finally meet you, sweetie. Your mother talks about you all the time." I poured them both coffee. Frank watched from behind the counter and said nothing. Diane cried. She said she wanted to reconnect. She said she missed her father. She said she was heartbroken she hadn't been there at the end. For about 3 minutes, I almost believed her. Then Richard leaned forward. "Sweetheart, your mother just wants what is fair. 11 million is a lot for someone your age to handle alone." I set my coffee down. My grandfather's attorney reviewed everything with me. "The will is clear." "Of course it is," Richard said. His smile stayed fixed, but something shifted behind his eyes. "We're just concerned. That's all." I watched him scan the cafe, the chipped counter, the vinyl booths, the tip jar by the register. He wasn't judging the decor. He was measuring the distance between where I worked and what I now controlled. "I appreciate you coming," I said. "But this is not a negotiation." Richard's jaw tightened. Diane reached for my hand. I did not pull away, but I did not squeeze back either. They left 20 minutes later. Richard forgot his sunglasses on the table. He never returned for them. The summons arrived 11 days later. A process server handed it to me while I was wiping down the counter at Frank's. The envelope was thick. The return address belonged to a law firm in Richmond, Voss and Associates. I opened it at the kitchen table that night. Diane had hired an attorney named Mitchell Voss. She was contesting my grandfather's will and petitioning the court to remove me as executor. The petition claimed I lacked the professional qualifications and financial acumen to manage an estate of this magnitude. I read that sentence 3 times. Professional qualifications. Financial acumen. I had spent 6 years prosecuting multi-million-dollar fraud cases in military courtrooms. I held a law degree from Georgetown. I had managed my grandfather's investments under power of attorney for 4 years since his first diagnosis. Yet according to Diane and her attorney, I was merely a girl who poured coffee. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the kind of anger that settles low in your stomach and does not fade with a breath. I called Elaine Park at 9 that night. Elaine and I had attended law school together. She was now a top estate attorney in Arlington. She picked up on the second ring. "They are going to try to make you look incompetent," she said after I read her the filing. "Character assassination, lifestyle attacks. They want the judge to see a waitress, not a lawyer." I know. We need to be ready. I know that too. I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time. Then I made a decision. I would not disclose my JAG status before the hearing. I would not correct their assumptions. I would let my mother and her attorney build their entire case on a photograph of me in an apron, and then I would stand up. The next 2 weeks were quiet on the outside and surgical on the inside. I kept working at Frank's. I poured coffee. I wiped tables. I smiled at regulars, refilled their mugs, and listened to their stories about weather, grandchildren, and which road had the worst potholes. Frank knew what was happening. He had known my grandfather for 40 years. "You okay, kid?" he asked one morning while I was restocking sugar packets. "I'm fine, Frank." He leaned against the counter. "Your grandfather told me once, If Diane ever comes back for the money, don't give her a dime. She'll spend it on the next husband. I did not laugh, but I wanted to. At night, Elaine and I built our case. We compiled 4 years of financial records, tax returns, investment statements, and quarterly reports. Under my management, the portfolio had grown 14%. Every tax filing was on time. Every charitable donation matched my grandfather's instructions: veterans education, local scholarships, the volunteer fire department. I also pulled my JAG service record: 6 years, 12 fraud cases prosecuted, 2 commendations, rank of captain. We placed everything in a binder with a blue cover, 62 pages. One evening, I stood in the cafe after closing. The chairs were up on the tables. The floor was mopped. My apron hung on the hook by the back door, the same hook, the same apron. Every day for 2 years. I looked at it for a long time. That apron was about to become the most important piece of evidence in my mother's case. She just did not know it yet. I turned off the lights and locked the door. Outside, the street lamp lit the sidewalk all the way to my grandfather's house, 2 blocks away. I had walked it 1,000 times. I walked it once more. Tomorrow was the hearing. The night before the hearing, I sat in my grandfather's study. The cedar box was on the desk. The letter was inside, folded exactly as he had left it. I did not open it. I did not need to. I had memorized every word. On the wall above the desk hung a photograph from 1998, my grandfather and me at the county fair. I was 7. He held me on his shoulders. We were both laughing at something I could no longer remember. Next to it, another photo. My grandfather in his army uniform, 1969. Young, serious, the same jawline I saw in my own mirror every morning. I went to the closet in the guest room where I kept my things. My JAG dress uniform hung in a garment bag. I unzipped it and looked at the insignia: Captain's Bars, JAG Corps branch pin. I did not put it on. I zipped the bag closed and chose a plain navy suit instead. No pins, no insignia, no signals. Let them see a waitress. Let them build their house on that foundation. When the time came, I would show them what lay underneath. Elaine called at 9. Their witness list is short, she said. Richard and 2 character witnesses. They are not attacking the will itself. They are attacking you, your lifestyle, your job, your apartment above the cafe. Good. The more they commit to that position, the harder the fall. That is something they taught me at Fort Liberty. Elaine paused. Sometimes you scare me, Karen. Only sometimes. She laughed. I did not. I set my alarm for 5:30. I laid out the navy suit on the bed. I placed the blue binder next to my bag. And I slept better than I had in weeks. Tomorrow I was going to sit in a courtroom and let my mother call me everything she wanted. And then I was going to stand up. The probate courtroom in our county sits on the 2nd floor of a building that also houses the tax assessor's office and a DMV satellite. The hallway smells of floor wax and old paper. The courtroom itself has wooden benches, an American flag, and fluorescent lights that buzz if you sit still long enough. I arrived at 8:15. The hearing was at 9. Elaine was already there setting up at the respondent's table. She wore a gray blazer and reading glasses. The blue binder sat in front of her like a loaded weapon. I sat beside her in my navy suit, hair pulled back, no jewelry except a small pin on my lapel, my JAG Corps insignia. If anyone looked closely, they would see it. Nobody looked closely. By 8:45, the gallery had filled, about 30 people. Frank sat in the 3rd row, arms crossed. The postman was behind him. I saw the pharmacist, the librarian, 2 of my grandfather's tenants, and a woman from the church auxiliary who had brought casseroles after the funeral. At 8:52, my mother walked in. She wore a dark blue dress and heels. Her mascara was already smudged, carefully, as if practiced in the car mirror. Richard followed in a gray suit, clean-shaven, carrying nothing. Behind them came Mitchell Voss, tall, pinstriped suit, briefcase the size of a small suitcase. He walked like a man who expected the room to part for him. They sat at the petitioner's table. Diane glanced at me once. Her eyes were wet. She looked away quickly. Judge Rebecca Torres entered at 9 sharp, silver hair, reading glasses on a chain, no smile. She sat, adjusted her mic, and opened the file. Good morning. We are here to address the matter of the estate of Walter R. Myers. Petitioner, you may begin. Voss stood, buttoned his jacket, and smiled at the judge. It was starting. Voss walked to the center of the room like he owned it. He set a folder on the edge of the judge's bench and opened it without asking permission. Your Honor, he said, we are here because a vulnerable, elderly man was influenced in his final years by a young woman with no financial background, no professional qualifications, and no business serving as executor of an $11 million estate. He paused, letting the number linger in the air. Then he pulled a photograph from the folder and held it up. It was me standing behind the counter at Frank's Cafe, apron tied at the waist, coffee pot in one hand, smiling at a customer. Your Honor, this is the person currently managing $11 million. He set the photo on the judge's bench. A waitress? My mother nodded from the petitioner's table, her chin trembling. Your Honor, she is just a waitress, Diane said softly, as though apologizing for me. A few people in the gallery shifted. Someone near the back chuckled, not loudly, but just enough. Judge Torres picked up the photo, studied it, then looked at me. She neither smiled nor frowned. She set the photo down and made a note. Voss continued. We are not here to disparage Ms. Myers's character. We are here to protect the interests of a substantial estate. The decedent's daughter, my client, has legitimate concerns about whether someone with this background is equipped to manage a portfolio of this size. He turned toward the gallery. With all due respect, Your Honor, would you trust your retirement fund to the girl who pours your morning coffee? I did not move. My hands remained flat on the table. My breathing stayed even. Elaine's pen stopped moving. I felt her tense beside me. I placed a hand on her arm. Not yet. Diane took the stand. She pressed a tissue to the corner of her eye and sat with her back very straight, the way someone does when they have rehearsed. I am a mother who lost her father, she began, and now I am losing my daughter too. She told the courtroom her version, that my grandfather had been confused in his last years, that I had manipulated him, that she had tried to visit but was turned away. By me, she implied, though she never said it directly. My father loved me, she said. He would never have cut me out if he had been in his right mind. Judge Torres listened without expression. Diane went on, describing herself as a devoted daughter who had been pushed aside. She said she had called many times, but her messages were not returned. She said she only wanted what was fair. I just want what is fair for our family, she said, looking directly at me. Her eyes were wet. Her voice broke on the word, family. The gallery was quiet. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Elaine stood. Your Honor, the decedent's mental competency was certified by 2 independent physicians at the time the will was executed. We have those certifications and are prepared to submit them. Noted, Judge Torres said. Continue. Diane wiped her eyes. Voss guided her through 3 more questions, each one designed to paint a picture of a woman abandoned by her own child, each one carefully avoiding the fact that Diane had left first. I sat still. My hands did not move. The thing about a courtroom is that it rewards patience. You do not win by reacting to every lie. You win by letting the lies pile up until the weight of them becomes obvious. Diane's lies were stacking. Richard took the stand next. He unbuttoned his jacket and sat like a man who had given depositions before, comfortable, expansive, legs crossed. As a businessman, he began, I can tell you that managing this kind of portfolio requires expertise, real-world financial experience. Karen, with all due respect, serves coffee for a living. He spoke for 4 minutes. He used the phrase fiduciary responsibility 3 times. He mentioned his own career in real estate development twice. He never mentioned his own finances. Elaine did. She stood for cross-examination and opened a manila folder. Mr. Hale, how many properties do you currently own or manage? Richard shifted. I have a portfolio of commercial holdings. How many of those holdings are currently in pre-foreclosure? The courtroom went still. Richard's jaw tightened. That is not relevant to this proceeding. Your Honor, Elaine said, turning to Judge Torres, we believe Mr. Hale's financial condition goes directly to motivation. He married the petitioner 14 months ago. He is now supporting a petition that would give his wife, and by extension himself, access to an $11 million estate. Meanwhile, 3 of his own commercial properties are in pre-foreclosure proceedings in Henrico County. Voss shot to his feet. Objection. Irrelevant and prejudicial. Judge Torres paused. It goes to motivation. I will allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Hale. Richard stared at Elaine. His practiced smile was gone. My personal finances have nothing to do with this. Do they not? Elaine said. She let the silence hold for 5 seconds. The gallery murmured. Someone whispered loud enough for me to hear. Knew it. Richard left the stand with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the floor. Elaine sat down and made a small check mark on her legal pad. She did not look at me. She did not need to. If you have ever sat in a room full of people who underestimated you, you know exactly how this feels. The urge to stand up, the discipline to stay seated. If this story is hitting close to home, drop a comment below. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. You do not want to miss what comes next. The judge called a recess at 11:40. I walked out of the courtroom and sat on a wooden bench in the hallway. Elaine followed me. You okay? Fine. She sat beside me. Richard cracked faster than I expected. He's been spending money he doesn't have. People like that always crack when you ask them to show their books. We sat in silence for a minute. Then Elaine asked, when do you want to use the letter? I knew which letter she meant. The one from the cedar box. I had found it 2 weeks after the funeral. My grandfather's handwriting, careful, leaning slightly right, the way they taught penmanship in the 1950s. The paper was heavy stationery, the kind he bought at the office supply store on Main Street. It was dated 6 months before he died, when his mind was still sharp and his hand was still steady. He had written it knowing this day would come. Karen, if your mother comes back, and she will, it will not be for me. It will be for the money. I do not say this to be cruel. I say it because I know her. I chose you because you stayed. Not because I love her less, but because you are the one who will protect what I built. The letter was notarized. Frank had witnessed it. I had read it so many times that the creases in the paper were soft. Not yet, I said. Let them finish their case first. Elaine nodded. She understood. In law school, we had a professor who used to say, never interrupt your opponent when they are making your argument for you. Voss was making our argument beautifully. Every photo, every insult, every just a waitress was another brick in our wall. I folded my hands and waited for the recess to end. The afternoon session started at 1:15. Voss had more photographs. He spread them across the judge's bench like playing cards. Me in the apron refilling a sugar dispenser. Me carrying a bus tub. Me wiping down a table in the back corner. Your Honor, Voss said. The executor of this estate lives in a rented apartment above a coffee shop. She drives a 10-year-old car. She works for tips. He let each detail land heavily. This is not someone who understands wealth management. This is someone who counts quarters at the end of her shift. Diane nodded from her table. Richard sat beside her, recovered now, arms crossed, the faintest smile on his face. Judge Torres studied the photographs. Then she looked up. Counselor, do you have anything beyond photographs? Voss paused. Your Honor, the photographs speak for themselves. I will decide what speaks for itself, the judge said. Do you have evidence of actual financial mismanagement, irregularities, missing funds, or improper transactions? Voss shuffled papers. We are in the process of subpoenaing those records, Your Honor. So you do not have them. The courtroom fell quiet. I felt Elaine shift beside me. She wanted to move. I placed my hand lightly on her arm. She stilled. Voss leaned in toward the judge. Your Honor, she is just a waitress. He said it 3 times total that day. I counted. Each time he smiled a little wider, as though repetition made it more true. It did not, but it made what came next far more effective. Judge Torres closed the folder of photographs. She adjusted her glasses and looked at me, not with sympathy, not with judgment, simply looking. The respondent may present her case. Elaine looked at me. I looked at her. I nodded once. It was time. Before Elaine stood, one thought filled my mind. In the Army, they teach a concept called overextension. A soldier who charges too far ahead of the line becomes isolated, cut off from support, and easy to flank. The instinct is to push harder and advance faster, but the disciplined move is to hold your position and let the enemy run past you. Boss had been running all morning. I learned patience at Fort Liberty. Not the kind where you wait because you have no choice, the kind where you wait because you know exactly when to move and exactly how hard to hit. I had sat through 4 hours of testimony, 4 hours of photographs and tears and the word waitress. 4 hours of my mother performing grief for a courtroom full of people who had never seen her grieve anything. My body was still. My breathing was controlled. My hands had not left the table since 9 o'clock. In my first year as a JAG officer, I prosecuted a supply sergeant who had been embezzling fuel funds for 3 years. His defense attorney spent 2 days building a case around his military service record, medals, deployments, and commendations. The attorney talked so long that the judge started checking the clock. When it was my turn, I presented one spreadsheet, 1 page, numbers in 2 columns. What came in? What went out? The gap between them was $417,000. The sergeant pleaded guilty the next morning. I did not need to shout. I did not need to perform. I needed 1 page of truth and the patience to let the other side exhaust themselves first. Voss was exhausted. He just did not know it yet. Elaine stood up, buttoned her blazer, and walked to the center of the courtroom. During the afternoon recess, I stayed on the bench outside the courtroom. Through the glass door, I could see Frank in the hallway. He was talking to the pharmacist and the woman from the church auxiliary. Their voices were low, but their gestures were not. I did not need to hear the words. I had seen the same scene play out in small towns my entire life. People talked. People compared what they saw with what they knew. And in our town, people knew. They knew I had been taking care of my grandfather for 2 years. They knew I walked to his house every day during my lunch break. They knew I sat with him during his appointments and drove him to the hospital when his breathing got bad. They knew because they were there. The pharmacist delivered his medication. The postman brought his mail. The librarian held books behind the counter for him because he could not stand in line anymore. And they knew where Diane had been, which was nowhere. I heard one fragment through the cracked door. The pharmacist's voice, flat and certain. That girl has been taking care of Walter for 2 years. Where was Diane? No one answered. No one needed to. Richard walked past the group. He looked at them. They looked at him. He pulled out his phone and walked down the hallway. Frank caught my eye through the glass. He walked over, leaned against the door frame. You want me to say something? I was there every day. I saw everything. I shook my head. Not yet, Frank. But thank you. He nodded. Walter would have hated this. I know. He also would have loved watching you handle it. Frank went back to his seat. I stayed on the bench and watched the clock on the wall above the water fountain. 22 minutes until the judge returned. The afternoon session resumed at 1:52. Voss stood immediately. He had one more motion. Your Honor, given the evidence presented today, the executor's lack of professional qualifications, her current employment, and her modest living circumstances, we respectfully request that the court appoint an independent fiduciary to assume management of the estate. He straightened his tie. The court has a duty to protect this estate from mismanagement. We are asking for a professional, a real financial manager. He glanced at me. Not a waitress. Judge Torres set down her pen. She did not pick it up again. Counselor Voss, I have heard your characterization of the respondent multiple times. I would appreciate it if you presented evidence of actual mismanagement rather than employment photographs. Voss opened his mouth. Your Honor, the lifestyle evidence speaks to competency. I will decide what speaks to competency, the judge said. Her voice was not loud, but it was final. Do you have financial records showing mismanagement, transactions that were improper, or investments that were negligent? Voss looked at his briefcase. He looked at Diane. He looked at the judge. We are in the process of subpoenaing those records. So you do not have them. Silence. You do not. Judge Torres wrote something on her pad. The respondent may present her case. Elaine looked at me. Her eyes were calm, focused, ready. I looked back. I nodded once, a single small movement. The kind of nod you learn in the military. The one that means go. Elaine stood. She picked up the blue binder. She walked to the center of the courtroom with the kind of posture that tells a room the conversation is about to change. "Your Honor," she said, "opposing counsel has spent considerable time discussing my client's apron." She set the binder on the edge of the bench. "I would like to discuss her credentials." Elaine opened the binder to the first tab. She did not rush. She did not raise her voice. She spoke the way someone speaks when they have facts and do not need anything else. "My client graduated from Georgetown University Law Center in 2018 on a full ROTC scholarship. She passed the Virginia bar exam on her first attempt. She was commissioned as an officer in the United States Army and has served for the past 6 years in the Judge Advocate General's Corps." She paused and turned the page. "My client is not just a waitress. She is Captain Karen Myers, United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps." The courtroom went silent. Not the polite silence of attention, but the absolute silence of 30 people recalculating everything they thought they knew. Diane's mouth opened. No sound came out. Richard went pale. His hand gripped the arm of his chair. Voss stood halfway, then sat back down. Judge Torres looked at me, then at Voss, then back at me. "Captain Myers," the judge said. I nodded. Voss recovered. "Objection. This was not disclosed in the respondent's filings. There is no requirement to disclose professional credentials in your client's petition, Counselor," Judge Torres said. "That was your oversight, not hers." She turned to Elaine. "Continue." Elaine continued. "Captain Myers has spent 6 years prosecuting complex fraud cases for the United States military. She has managed cases involving financial irregularities exceeding $50 million in total scope. She holds a top-secret security clearance and has received 2 formal commendations from the Department of the Army." Elaine closed the binder gently. "She also makes an excellent cup of coffee, but I suspect that is not what this court is evaluating today." No one laughed, but Frank in the third row smiled. Elaine opened the second tab of the binder. "Your Honor, I would like to submit 4 years of financial records documenting my client's management of the Walter Myers estate." She walked the judge through it page by page. Power of attorney granted 4 years ago when Walter was first diagnosed. Tax filings clean and on time every year. Investment performance reports showing a 14% growth in portfolio value under Karen's stewardship. Charitable donations to the local Veterans Education Fund, the Volunteer Fire Department, and a scholarship program at the high school, all per Walter's written instructions. "Every dollar is accounted for," Elaine said. "Every transaction documented, every investment decision aligned with the decedent's stated wishes." She placed the binder in front of the judge. "The waitress, Your Honor, has managed $11 million without a single irregularity. Can Mr. Hale say the same about his own finances?" Voss did not object. Richard did not move. Judge Torres took the binder. She opened it and read slowly, turning pages with the kind of deliberation that told the room she was not performing. She was deciding. The courtroom waited. I watched the judge's face. She paused on the investment summary. She paused again on the charitable giving page. She studied the power of attorney document for a long time. Then she closed the binder and set it to her right. She did not return it. Diane was staring at the table. Her tissue was shredded in her hands. Richard leaned over and whispered something. She shook her head. Voss flipped through his own papers. I could see from across the room that his hands were moving faster than his eyes. He was looking for something to say. He did not find it. Elaine waited until the judge set the binder down. "Your Honor, I would like to submit one final document." She pulled a clear plastic sleeve from inside her briefcase. Inside was a single sheet of heavy stationery, handwritten, creased from being folded and unfolded many times. "This is a letter written by Walter Myers to his granddaughter, Captain Myers. It is dated 6 months prior to his passing. It has been notarized and witnessed by Francis Duke, Frank, the owner of the cafe where my client worked." Judge Torres took the letter. She read it silently. The courtroom was still. Elaine spoke, reading the key passage aloud for the record. "Karen, if your mother comes back, and she will, it will not be for me. It will be for the money. I do not say this to be cruel. I say it because I know her. I chose you because you stayed. Not because I love her less, but because you are the one who will protect what I built." A woman in the gallery pressed her hand to her mouth. The pharmacist looked at the floor. Judge Torres set the letter down carefully. She removed her glasses, cleaned them, and put them back on. She did not speak for a long time. Diane stared at the letter from across the room. I watched her face shift, anger, then something softer, then anger again. For 1 second, she looked like a woman who had just heard her father's voice for the last time. Then she looked away. The letter had lived in a cedar box for 6 months. Now it lived in a courtroom record. My grandfather's voice one last time, in a room full of people who needed to hear it. She stayed. That is all I ever needed. The words hung in the fluorescent light like something too heavy to fall. If someone you loved ever wrote you something that changed everything, you know what this moment feels like. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have not subscribed yet, hit that button now. We are getting to the part you have been waiting for. Diane stood up. She was not called to speak. No one invited her. She stood, and the tissue fell from her lap. Her voice cracked the silence like a stone through glass. He loved me. He was my father. She turned toward me. You stole him from me. You stole everything. You sat in his house and you poisoned him against his own daughter. Her voice climbed. Richard reached for her arm. She shoved his hand away. I am her mother. Does that not count for anything? The courtroom held its breath. I looked at her. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I did not open my mouth. I wanted to say so many things. I wanted to ask where she was when I graduated high school, where she was when my grandfather had his first surgery, where she was for Christmas, for my birthday, for any Tuesday in the last 20 years. But I said nothing. The courtroom already knew. Voss was on his feet. Your Honor, my client is understandably emotional. One more outburst, Judge Torres said, and I will clear the gallery. Richard pulled Diane back into her chair. She went, but not quietly. She was sobbing now, real tears, not the practiced kind from earlier. The kind that come from somewhere deep and ugly and true. I am her mother, she said again. Quieter this time, almost to herself. I placed my hands flat on the table. I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth, the way they teach you before you enter a hostile environment. This was not hostile. This was just sad. The courtroom door opened. Every head turned. Colonel James Patterson walked in wearing his Class A dress uniform, pressed green jacket, silver oak leaf clusters, service ribbons in 4 rows. His boots clicked on the tile floor with a rhythm that silenced every whisper in the gallery. He walked to the front of the courtroom, nodded to Judge Torres, and took a seat in the witness area. Elaine stood. Your Honor, I would like to call a character witness, Colonel James Patterson, United States Army. Judge Torres looked at the colonel. Colonel Patterson, Elaine said, how do you know Captain Myers? I served as her commanding officer for 3 years at Fort Liberty, formerly Fort Bragg. She was assigned to my legal office. And in your professional assessment, Colonel, how would you describe Captain Myers? Patterson did not hesitate. She is one of the finest legal officers I have had under my command. Her judgment is exceptional. Her integrity is beyond question. If you ask me to name 5 officers I would trust with my career, she would be on that list. He looked at me and gave one nod, the same nod I had given Elaine 30 minutes earlier. Captain Myers once told me she learned discipline from her grandfather, he said. I told her she was the most disciplined officer in my unit. Both statements were true. Judge Torres looked at Voss. Counselor, do you wish to cross-examine? Voss did not stand. He looked at his briefcase, then at the colonel in full dress uniform, then at the gallery. No, Your Honor. It was the smartest thing he said all day. Judge Torres turned to me. Captain Myers, I have a few questions for you directly. I stood. I did not grip the table or take a breath or steel myself. I simply stood, the way you stand when you have been sitting in the truth for hours, and it is finally time to speak it. Why did you not disclose your military career at the outset of these proceedings? Your Honor, my grandfather taught me that your title does not define your worth. He was a janitor before he was a businessman. I am a waitress and a JAG officer. Both are honest work. I did not think my uniform should matter more than my record, or the waitressing. I paused. My grandfather was dying. Frank's cafe is 2 blocks from his house. I wanted to be close enough to walk to him on my lunch break. So I tied on an apron and poured coffee for 2 years. I paused again. I would do it again. The courtroom was silent. I looked at the apron photograph still sitting on the judge's bench. The apron they used to shame me is the same apron I wore to be near my grandfather when he needed me most. I am not ashamed of it. I am proud of it. Judge Torres removed her glasses. She looked at me the way people look when they have stopped evaluating and started understanding. Thank you, Captain Myers. You may be seated. I sat down. Elaine placed her hand on the binder. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Across the room, Diane was looking at her own hands. Richard was staring at the wall. Voss was closing his briefcase. The judge picked up her pen. I am prepared to issue my ruling. Judge Torres spoke without notes. I have reviewed the will of Walter R. Myers. I have reviewed the financial records submitted by Respondents' Counsel. I have reviewed the competency certifications from 2 independent physicians. I have read the letter written by the decedent. And I have heard testimony from both parties and their witnesses. She paused. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The petition to remove Captain Karen Myers as executor of the Walter R. Myers estate is denied. My chest released something I had been holding since January. The will of Walter Myers stands as written. The decedent's wishes are clear, documented, and supported by a pattern of responsible financial management that predates these proceedings by 4 years. She looked at Voss. Furthermore, I am troubled by the nature of the petitioner's case. Counselor Voss presenting employment photographs as evidence of incompetence, without a single document showing actual financial mismanagement, is frankly beneath this court. Voss opened his mouth. Your Honor, I am not finished. The room was still. If a petition of this nature comes before me again, one that relies on personal disparagement rather than substantive evidence, I will consider sanctions. This court does not measure competence by the uniform someone wears or the apron. She picked up the gavel, held it for 1 second. The sound it made was small, but it was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Diane collapsed forward. Her shoulders shook. She was crying, not the delicate performative tears from this morning, but the ugly kind. The kind that comes when you lose something you were never entitled to in the first place. Richard stood up. He did not touch her. He did not look at her. He buttoned his jacket and walked out of the courtroom without saying a word. Richard made it to the hallway before Frank stepped into his path. Frank was not a big man. 5'8", white hair, hands stained from decades of dish soap and coffee grounds. But he stood in the center of the hallway and did not move. You came here for the money, Frank said. Everyone knows it. Richard stopped. Get out of my way. Frank stepped aside. He did not need to block the path. He needed Richard to hear the words. That girl poured coffee in my shop for 2 years. She never once mentioned the military. Never once bragged. That is the kind of person Walter raised. Richard walked past him and pushed through the stairwell door. His phone was already at his ear. I heard one fragment before the door closed. The deal is off. There is no money. Inside the courtroom, people stood up slowly, the way you stand after something important has ended and you are not sure what to do with your hands. The pharmacist found me first. He shook my hand with both of his. Your grandpa would be proud. The librarian was behind him. We always knew, honey. The woman from the church auxiliary hugged me. She smelled like lemon cake and hairspray. One of my grandfather's tenants, a retired teacher named Margaret, squeezed my arm. Walter used to say you were his best investment. I think he was right. Frank sat in the third row, arms crossed, watching it all with the expression of a man who had bet on the right horse and was enjoying the finish. Voss packed his briefcase in silence. He did not shake Diane's hand. He did not look at anyone. He walked out the side door like a man trying to leave without being remembered. The courtroom emptied slowly. I stayed. Elaine was gathering her papers. The court reporter was packing up the stenography machine. Diane was still sitting at the petitioner's table alone. Richard was gone. Voss was gone. She sat with her purse in her lap and her mascara streaked down both cheeks. She was looking at her phone. I could see the screen from where I sat. It was a photograph, an old one. My grandfather holding me when I was about 4. Both of us laughing, his arms around me like I was the only thing in the world worth holding. For 1 second I saw her. Not the woman who sued me. Not the woman who left when I was 12. Not the woman who performed grief for a courtroom. I saw a woman who had lost her father and understood, somewhere too deep to admit, that she had been losing him for 20 years, and it was her own doing. That second passed. She looked up. Her eyes found mine. They hardened. "This is not over," she said. "I will appeal." I kept my voice level. "That is your right. You think you are so much better than me." "No," I said. I think I stayed. The word landed in the space between us. It was the same word my grandfather had used in his letter. She knew it. I knew it. She stood, grabbed her purse, and walked past me without looking. Her heels clicked on the tile fast and uneven, the sound of someone trying to leave before the tears returned. The courtroom door swung shut behind her. I sat for another minute. I thought about the woman who had just left, and the woman she could have been if she had simply come home. Then I picked up my bag and walked out into the afternoon light. Colonel Patterson was leaning against his car in the parking lot. The afternoon sun caught the silver on his uniform. "Captain." "Colonel." He looked at the courthouse. "Your grandfather called me last year before the diagnosis got bad. He asked me to come if anything happened." He paused. "I told him I would. He never told me. That is because he trusted you to handle it yourself. I was the backup plan." I felt my eyes sting. I blinked it away. "Thank you for coming, sir." "Do not thank me. Thank Walter." He straightened. "He also told me to tell you to stop working so hard." A half smile crossed his face. I told him that was not going to happen. He saluted, not the crisp, full-arm formal salute, but a shorter one, the kind shared between people who have served together and do not need formality to say what matters. I returned it. He got in his car and drove away. Virginia plates. Elaine came out a moment later, briefcase in one hand, the blue binder under her arm. "The appeal thread is empty," she said. "Diane's case had nothing. Boss knows it." "I know. You could have told them who you were on day one. Then they would have changed their strategy." I needed the judge to see exactly who my mother is, not who I am. Elaine looked at me for a long time. Then she shook her head. "Remind me never to argue against you in court." I almost smiled. Almost. I drove back to the cafe. It was closed. Frank had shut down early for the hearing, but the door was unlocked. The lights were on. Frank was behind the counter wiping it down with a rag that was older than me. "Rough day," he said. I sat on the stool closest to the register, the same stool my grandfather used to sit on every Saturday morning. Something like that. Frank reached under the counter and pulled out a ceramic mug, white, chipped on the handle, with a faded blue stripe around the rim. My grandfather's mug. Frank had kept it behind the counter since the funeral. He never offered it to anyone else. He poured me a cup and slid it across. The coffee was still fresh. He had made it before the hearing ended, like he already knew how it was going to go. I wrapped both hands around the mug. It was warm. I looked at the apron hanging on the hook by the back door. Same hook. Same apron. Same 2 years of mornings and lunch rushes and closing shifts, but it meant something different now. "Walter told me once," Frank said, leaning on the counter the way he always did, "that girl is going to be fine. She does not need anyone to tell her who she is." I sipped the coffee. Outside, the sun was going down over Main Street. The light came through the front window and turned everything golden. The counter, the mugs, the sugar dispensers, the old photographs on the wall behind the register. The cafe smelled like coffee and cedar. It smelled like home. 2 months later, Diane did not appeal. Her attorney, Mitchell Voss, received a formal reprimand from the State Bar Association for the nature of his courtroom presentation. The word around Richmond was that his practice lost 3 clients within a week. Richard and Diane separated 6 weeks after the hearing. Richard's 3 pre-foreclosure properties became public knowledge when the Henrico County records hit the local paper. No one in our town was surprised. Frank said it best, "A man who hides his debts will hide a lot more." I completed my PCS orders in April. My new posting was the JAG office at Fort Meade in Maryland. Before I left, I sat down with Elaine and set up the Walter Myers Veterans Education Fund, a scholarship program funded by the estate for children and grandchildren of local veterans. It was what my grandfather would have wanted. It was what he had started planning before he got sick. I kept the apartment above Frank's cafe. I still pay rent. It is not about the address, I told Frank. It is about having a place that remembers. He charged me half rate. I did not argue. Diane sent one text 3 weeks after the hearing. No words, just the photograph, the old one from her phone. My grandfather holding me at 4 years old. I did not reply, but I saved the photo. I do not know if my mother will ever understand. I do not know if she will ever come back for the right reasons. Not for money, not for guilt, but because she wants to know the person I became while she was gone. I stopped waiting for her a long time ago. I do not owe anyone an explanation for who I am. Not to a courtroom, not to a camera, not to the woman who left. My grandfather built something with his hands and he trusted me to protect it. That is what I did. That is what I will keep doing. My grandfather was right. The quietest person in the room is usually the one who knows the most. I did not need to shout. I did not need to prove anything to anyone who was not willing to look past the apron. I just needed to stand up, tell the truth, and let the silence do the rest. Some lessons take 32 years to learn. This one was worth every minute. That is my story. One courtroom, one apron, and a grandfather who believed in me before I believed in myself. If this story reminded you to stand your ground, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.